I think we all know that the January 6th Pelosi committee is a nefarious operation, but one of its more nefarious recent ventures, described by Molly Hemingway in an article in The Federalist, is how the committee is now boasting that it's going to criminalize Republican fundraising, or at least try to do that. Now, how is a congressional committee going to do that? Well, it's essentially a harassment strategy. What they do is they use their subpoena power to go to all these Republican and conservative groups and basically say this: have you been raising money off of the election, the 2020 election? Have you been raising money in the promise or the expectation that you're going to, fight election fraud? And the January 6th committee is like, if you're doing that, you're promoting the big lie. You're creating the basis for a potential insurrection. And so we're going to be able to sort of accuse you of the kind of incitement that led to January 6th. Now, if all this seems like idle boasting, and I think a lot of it is, nevertheless, there is an effect, a chilling effect, when you get subpoenas and letters landing on your doorstep from the January 6th committee. Show up over here, provide copies of all your emails, send us copies of all your letters. And so the idea here is to intimidate Republican and conservative groups. And it's all based upon this kind of doctrine that it's sort of not okay. In fact, it is completely out of bounds. It is deeply undemocratic, if not potentially criminal, to question the results of an election. Now, I think what makes all of this really funny, I was a few days ago on Fox talking about this, is that Democrats have always contested for a long time. In fact, for pretty much the last 2 decades, contested all elections that they have lost. Let's start with the 2016 election. Democrats, first of all, a bunch of Democrats contested the electoral count. Number two, a whole bunch of Democrats, mainstream Democrats, people like John Lewis in the House, refused to show up for Trump's inauguration. Why? Because they said he was an illegitimate president. You might remember Hollywood actors, left-wing activists calling on the Trump electors not to cast their votes for Trump, even though they were pledged to Trump, because, again, Trump's election was somehow illegitimate. The Democrats for 4 years talked about how Russia hacked the election. They're still talking about it, even though the whole notion has been exposed as a hoax. A hoax, in fact, planted by the Hillary campaign. Nevertheless, it's almost as if the media promulgated this so relentlessly, that this kind of false doctrine has set in. The point is that what makes the 2020 election unique is not that the results were questioned, but that the results were questioned by Republicans. So Republicans are not supposed to question an election result. This is the first time, in fact, to my knowledge in living memory, that Republicans have even done this. Republicans normally go, okay, well, you know what, we lost, let's move on. Even when Nixon lost to Kennedy, an election that, by the way, Nixon thought had been corrupted by fraud, both in Texas and in Cook County, Illinois, Nixon basically decided, let it be for the good of the country. I don't want the division. I don't want to stretch this out. I'm essentially going to gracefully exit the stage. And this is the Republican way. So it's amazing that Democrats are suddenly acting in a sort of feigned pretense that questioning elections is just simply not something that you can do, when they've been doing it, and they did it in the very last election. By the way, they questioned the results of the 2000 election, the 2004 election. You'd really have to go back to 1988. This was the election of George H.W. Bush, when Democrats lost an election and basically did not question the result. Number two, part of what the January 6th committee is trying to say is that these Republican fundraising campaigns by Trump, by the way, and others, are inherently deceitful because Trump knows that he lost the election. So essentially what they're saying is that Trump is aware that he lost the election. He's aware that there was no election fraud, but still he's fundraising off of it, kind of like a false advertising type of claim. But if there's one thing that Trump knows, it's that he won the election. Anyone who sat down with Trump for 5 minutes recognized that Trump does not believe he lost. And anyone who says, oh yeah, he really knows that he lost, but he's just pretending that he won in order to raise money, has in zero comprehension of Trump and has not even been observing what Trump has been saying and doing for the past year and a half. Of course, the final question, which is the question I'm going to explore in my upcoming film, 2000 Mules, is the underlying premise of all this, which is simply what happened in the 2020 election. And the truth of it is, we don't know. We don't have the full picture. I don't have the full picture to this point, but I do have part of the picture, and I'm able to communicate it not in a manner that suggests insinuation and suspicion, and it may have been this and it could have been that. I'm able to describe the way that at least some of it really was and prove it. And I think that's the power of this movie. By the way, if you haven't gone to the website, go to 2000mules.com. Make sure you sign up for the email updates. Why? Because this way I can communicate directly with you, kind of circumvent the wall of censorship that inevitably surrounds this type of an issue. Anyway, the January 6th committee, frankly, I find this menagerie to be unthreatening and virtually comic. But I realize that people, particularly people kind of in the legal sphere, always freak out with subpoenas and demands for this and demands for that. But I think that they're putting on a kind of theater, a theater admittedly aimed at intimidation, but intimidation only works on people who are willing to be intimidated.